Okay, so let's begin. Um, yeah, so we're in the middle of discussing the very delicate issue, the maybe the most um, famous and also the most consequential issue in understanding the principle of yibum and the obligation towards the family of a deceased brother, and that is how what we're discussing is how the prohibition against marrying, a sister-in-law, a wife of a brother. How do we understand the fact that that is set aside for the purposes of Ebo? So the background for this is, that the Gemara here on Dav Gimel Amud Beis, as we discussed, was considering the possibility that let's go back to the Gemara just for a minute. The Gemara notes that according to the Mishnah, if you have what we call erva, namely you have prohibited or illicit relationships, a daughter, a wife, the sister of a wife, a mother-in-law, the 15 examples of the Mishnah, that if the candidate for Yibum is one of those, then the principle of Yibum does not apply. That's the Mishnah. That's Kamesh Esrei Nashim Potros Sorosem Vitzaros Sorosem Minachalitzim. So the Gemara says, and Av Gimel Amud Beis, that the source for this is a verse in Parshas Acharei Mos. Minani Mili, says the Gemara. This is also in the sheets, but it's 7 lines down. Last word on the line. To Tanrabanan Isha alachosa lo tikach litzor legalos ervasa aleha bichayeha. So the word aleha, a woman says Isha elachosa lo tikach. A woman, can a sister of a wife cannot enter into a marital relationship with this man, even after divorce, as long as the initial wife, meaning the sister, is alive. And the word aleha, litzor legalos aleha, arvas aleha bechayeha. So the Gemara says aleha, ma tamud lomar, shenemar yava ma yavo aleha, shomeani afilu bachas b'kol arayis, so amuris batorah, kasu bedaber, nemar kan aleha, nemar lahalon aleha, malon b'mokom mitzvah, kan b'mokom mitzvah. Basically, what this means is, Omar Rachmana, lo tikach. So what the Gemara says is that the reference to Yibum in the Parsha in Acharei Mos, telling you that you, under no conditions or under no circumstances, can have a marital relationship with your wife's sister as long as your wife is alive, even if she's no longer your wife, meaning even after a divorce, as long as she is still alive, you can never marry her sister. That's what these words mean. That is true even in the context of Yibum, even if there is a circumstance where the the brother, there's two brothers married two sisters, sorry, two wives, two brothers married two sisters. Reuven and Shimon married Rachel and Leah. So what happened was, excuse me, Reuven died, and therefore his wife Rachel, is a Yibum candidate for Shimon, but Shimon's wife Leah is still alive. So since that is the case, what we're saying is that Rachel, the sister of Leah and the wife of Reuven, who just died without leaving any children, she cannot be a Yibum, candidate. That's what the Torah is telling us. Not only is she prohibited to him even after a divorce between Shimon and Leah, but in addition to that, even in the circumstances which normally would trigger the response of Yibum, it doesn't if she is related, in this double way. She's not only the wife of his deceased brother, she's also the sister of his alive wife. That's the Gemara. So then on the bottom of the daf, if you skip down to the bottom, the Gemara says, Talmud Kosav Rachmana Aleha Alavachi Havamina Achos Isha Miyavemes. The only reason that there's no Yibum when there's an additional problematic relationship is because of this source. I mean, otherwise, we would have thought that logically it would be okay to extend the principle of Yibum even to a circumstance of erva, my taima, because the positive commandment thrusts aside a negative commandment. But the Gemara says, meaning there's a mitzvah of Yibum, there's a prohibition of achos ishto, of the sister of his wife, and the positive commandment of doing mitzvah of Yibum outweighs or overrides the prohibition against having a relationship with your wife's sister. That is what the Gemara is suggesting would have been the basis, if not for the pasuk, to teach you the din of achosisha being a yibum candidate. But the Gemara objects to that by saying that can't be because when do we say this principle that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment? Only losase greda, if all there is a negative commandment. But losasa sheyesh kares, if it's a negative commandment that is particularly severe, where the onesh is some sort of a death penalty, even if it's a divine death penalty, meaning not carried out in human court, but deserving of kares. Nonetheless, midachi, we don't apply the principle of ase dochalos ase. So mostly the Gemara seems to conclude that we don't need a source to teach you that an erva is excluded from yibum. It's excluded from yibum because there's no basis to allow yibum when there's no justification of ase dochalos ase. Okay, so that's where we were. Now, this principle, then the Gemara goes on to say, the visu los ase greda, the bottom words on Gimel Amud Beis going into Daled Amud Aleph, the Gemara says visu los ase greda minalan dedachi. The Gemara says, how do you even know anyway that there is such a principle, that there is such an idea that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment? So the Gemara says, starts trying to bring a source. Lo tilba shatnez, gedilim taselacha, from tzitzis, from other things. Basically, the Gemara, the next couple of dapim, is dedicated to this principle of asi ase v'dachi los ase, of a positive commandment that overrides a negative commandment. Okay, so that's what the Gemara, that's where the Gemara is, at the moment. So the first thing to note is that this principle of ase docha los ase is a very curious principle. If I were to ask you, which is more chamor, which is more stringent, which is a bigger breach of halachic, conduct, abstaining from performing a positive mitzvah, or overruling the prohibition, meaning transgressing a negative commandment. Let's say, what's worse, not picking up a lulav, or not blowing shofar, or doing a violation, eating a non-kosher food?
Would depend on the punishment for each one to grade the relative punishment.
Okay, great. So let's assume for the moment that the punishment is something that reflects the severity of the offense. So which triggers a greater punishment? Abstaining from positive command or transgressing a negative precept? The answer,
either or, depending on the particular mitzvah.
Well, it doesn't usually. In most cases, it doesn't. In most cases, there's a principle. I mean, there are two mitzvos aseh out there. There are two positive commandments that actually trigger a capital offense. One of them is the eating of the Korban Pesach. I mean, if you abstain from eating Korban Pesach when there was one, meaning the time of the Beis Hamikdash, and when you had the possibility of doing so, you were pure. There was an accessible Korban Pesach. If you didn't, to make sure to participate in eating the Korban Pesach, that's called a mitzvah saseh sheyesh bakares. That's a positive commandment, which whose ignoring is a capital offense. There's another one. Anybody know the other one? It's bris milah.
Ignoring is a capital offense?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, did I miss that? Ignoring? Rabbi said ignoring?
Ignoring the obligation to eat the korban pesach.
Oh, I missed that part.
Is a
Okay, thank
mitzvah saseh. That's what I'm trying to explain is that I think you came in the middle. I think your box was there, but not necessarily you. But it seems like that we're discussing the following question. Let me get everybody caught up again. So we're discussing the principle that the Gemara is utilizing, the principle of aseh do chalos aseh. Positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. I'm posing the question whether or not that's logical or not. And Dr. Weg correctly suggests that it depends which is more severe, and maybe that itself depends on the punishment, that you trigger, when you are in violation. So I'm saying let's look at that for a moment. In mitzvos aseh, there are only two mitzvos aseh that trigger a capital punishment. One is bris milah, meaning if you fail to circumcise, yourself, after if you're a little boy, then obviously you're not, held culpable. But if he's supposed to be circumcised and he wasn't, in all his life he refuses to attend to that commandment, that's called a mitzvah sheyesh bakares. The other one is korban pesach. Not bringing or not eating the korban pesach triggers the punishment of kares. Every other violation of a mitzvah saseh or abstention from a mitzvah saseh basically doesn't trigger an actual punishment. Like if you don't blow shofar, or you don't hear the shofar, or you don't pick up the lulav, or you don't sit in a sukkah, or you don't eat matzah, don't get me wrong. Every dedicated Jew is supposed to do all those things and is supposed to make it his business to do so. But what happens if you abstain? I'm not talking about accidentally. I'm talking about intentionally. Like you could do it. You don't want to bother. You're too tired. You're lazy. You're rebelling. So you don't engage in any of these mitzvot and many, many others. So what is the consequence of that? The answer is there is no corporal punishment. There's no financial punishment. The Gemara does say in Ksuvas that, the courts have the right to coerce you to do mitzvah saseh. That's not an onesh. That's, we'll call it, to be half facetious, we'll call it incentive. But there is no, aside from the kares of the mitzvah saseh of Mila and Korban Pesach, in most mitzvah saseh, the loss is yours, meaning your loss is the fact that you've squandered an opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah. Let me say further, when you don't fulfill a mitzvah saseh, so the Gemara says in Masachet Yoma that you have to bring a korban ola, a burnt offering, as they call it, I guess. Is that the right name? Burnt offering. So bring a korban ola. As opposed to, for example, when you violate a lav, a negative commandment, especially one, which is severe. So then, even if it's accidental, you made a mistake, you bring a korban chatas for the aveira, and if it's more than then you get an onus, you get a real punishment. So the point is that abstaining from a positive commandment, aside from bris milah and korban pesach, requires that you do some sort of ritzui, that you try to, bring a korban ola, but it's a different kind of a korban. You bring a korban ola. I'll take the question one more second. You bring a korban ola also, by the way, for hirhur avera. Let's say you were thinking to do an avera. You also bring a korban ola. It's more of a what the Gemara calls in Masechet Zvachim a doron. It's like a gift to the Rebbeinu Shalom, like, to reconnect or the relationship or to put it right, when it has been, compromised, in some way. But it's not a punishment really, and it's not even that kind of, atonement. Whereas in a lav, there are different levels of lav, but for example, any lav sheish bo mamon, let's say you steal, you rob, so then you don't get physical punishment, but you have to pay. In some cases, you also pay a penalty, case of Geneva. If you violate a lav sheyesh b'maisa, which most are, and in other words, you transgress actively, so there are lashes, that's malchos. There can be misa in some cases. So, going back to Dr. Wegg's very good suggestion, right? Basically, the violation of a lav triggers punishments that are significantly more severe than abstaining from a mitzvah saseh. So, if that's the case, how could it be that an aseh, a positive command, overrides a negative command? But there was a question. Yeah.
So why are those two mitzvahs singled out, Brit
Okay.
Milah and
So
Korban Pesach?
if that's a great question. The theory is that these are two mitzvos which aren't just positive commandments, meaning Korban Pesach, or we'll say it the other way, Bris Milah and Korban Pesach. These aren't just two positive commandments. They are two commandments that go to the core of Jewish commitment and identity. Now, the reason that is true, Bris Milah, you can totally understand. That's what identifies the Jewish male, and, from the very beginning, Avram Avinu, and Yitzchak, Lachnis, we call it a bris. Bris means a covenant, right? So it's Lachniso bebriso shel Avram Avinu. You make a separate bracha, by the way, at a bris. You make two brachos. You make the bracha Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav etzivanu ala milah, like you do in any other mitzvah. You make a bracha that, describes, the performance of the mitzvah. In addition to that, you make a second bracha, lachniso bebriso shel Avram Avinu. And that's because the bris milah isn't just a narrow obligation. It is a way of proclaiming your commitment to the totality of Jewish law and Jewish identity. And that's why I say it's more than simply an assay. It's a reflection of your commitment, and therefore, if somebody refuses, I'm not talking about by accident. Let's say, this whole question in the halacha, if somebody's a hemophiliac or he has that, in his family, so you can't have a bris milah if it endangers your life. So we're not talking about onus. We're not talking about. But in a regular, typical, where you have the opportunity to do bris milah and you abstain, you squander that opportunity. So it's perceived, the second bracha reflects it, and the special din of milah reflects it. And by the way, the fact that gerus, that when a person, becomes a convert, so a male convert has to undergo milah, right? In addition to tefillah, also female convert does tefillah alone, but the male convert is milah and tefillah, and hoda and kabbalah sol mitzvos. That's not a coincidence. It's because this is all about the bris, the covenant, the larger identification and commitment to the totality of Jewish law. So for that reason, it's an aseh sheish bakaris. You might ask, well, what about Korban Pesach? That seems, well, the answer is Korban Pesach. We just read Parshas Bo, a couple of weeks ago. And I've spoken about this a lot in advance of, Chag HaMatzos.
Isn't the kares on the lav, not on the asay part? If somebody doesn't do it or something.
No, Korban Pesach, you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, it's the mitzvah saseh. The mitzvah of achilas, Korban Pesach, is a mitzvah saseh. Like bris milah, those are the only two. Is a mitzvah saseh sheish bakaris. Now there is no lav, but abstaining from eating Korban Pesach when you are able to. So why? The answer is because the moment that that Klal Yisrael shechted brought the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim was a shining,
Kiddush Hashem.
moment. Ad sheyishkatu Eloheim li'eineim. It showed that they were all in, that they were, signing up to be devoted, to a different kind of destiny, that they were going to be committed to being Am Yisrael, to being a different nation that has a different relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ad kedei kach, I always try to highlight this, but there's a very fascinating, medrash, both in the Mechilta and in the Sifrei, both in Parshas Bo, in other words, and in Bahaloscha, I believe, which is the other parsha of Korban Pesach, Pesach Sheni, where Rashi quotes it in both places, where the Medrash says that you might have thought that if a person is misgayer, if he converts, so during the year, anytime during the year that he converts, he would also have to bring a Korban Pesach. And then the
why would you have thought that when
so that's
special parsha of Pesach Sheni to say that you have an exception for if you don't do it on that particular day?
So the halacha you don't, but it says if when you have a ger ba'artzachem, so the medrash in both places says you would have thought that maybe you'd have to bring a Korban Pesach no matter what time of the year it is. Kamashmon, the Torah is telling you only bring Pesach during Pesach, no other time in the year. So the question is this, 1 second, did anybody ever say in the Mechilta that you might, that maybe if you're a ger, you should eat matzah, or you should break you should pick up a lulav, or you should, bring a korban chagiga? No one ever said such a thing. Why Korban Pesach? But the answer is because Korban Pesach is to the tzibur, right? What bris milah is to the yachid. It was a statement of national identification because they basically slaughtered the Egyptian god. That was their way of saying we have total faith in the Ribono Shel Olam. We are enthusiastically signing up for a different destiny.
That's why if everybody's tummy, I think they don't bring a korban second.
Well, Tumah Hutra B'tzibur, but you mean the second one? Yeah. I mean, why you do it in the first one? Yeah. The reason Tumah because it's a national, cause. So both Bris Milah and Korban Pesach are mitzvahs aseh, sheyesh bohem kares. It's a good question that you asked because they are both not just standalone positive commandments. One on an individual level and the other on a communal level represents the total commitment to the bris or to the totality, of what it means, to commit as a member of the Jewish people.
And the Kidashti B'soch is not the same. It doesn't fit that same category.
Well, it's not a mitzvah sheish bakares, if that's what you're asking.
No, I'm saying why not? I mean, according to that.
No, that just means to me mekadesh shem shemayim. Here we're talking about what the Sefer Chinuch calls the Korban Pesach a korban emuna, a sacrifice of belief, and it basically is saying this same idea. Anyways, aside from that, the rest of mitzvahs aseh are very important, obviously, but if you abstain from them, even though the courts can force you to engage in them, but minat Torah there is no onesh. On the other hand, if you eat non-kosher food, you get lashes, you get malchus. And if you steal, you would have gotten lashes if not for the fact that you have to pay back. So it's lav, shanitan the tashlumin, or lav anita klase. And if you, are engaged in immoral behavior, if it's, chayve krisis, which we've been talking about, then that's, a capital offense. So the question returns. If the only two mitzvos aseh that get a severe punishment are bris milah and korban pesach, we're not talking about them. So why, if a regular mitzvah aseh is obviously the abstention from it is a lesser, violation, then how can it be that aseh is no chalos aseh? that a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Oh, so the Ramban, in his commentary to Parshas Yisro, last week's Parsha, he quotes from the Sefer HaBahir, a kind of a, Kabbalistic work, but I think he means this both Kabbalistically and also homiletically and also halachically. And he says the following idea. He says, really, mitzvah saseh, is something that represents Avas Hashem, love of God. And the mitzvah lo saseh, represents Yiras Hashem, fear of God. So what he means by that is, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that, you're not allowed to do the next thing, meaning those aren't, abstaining from doing them, is making sure that you don't offend, the Rabboni Shalom. So they're being scrupulous about lavin is an expression of Yiras Hashem. If you violate a lav, you're violating Yiras Hashem. However, doing a mitzvah saseh positively, embracing the opportunity, to do mitzvos, that's an expression of, that's a positive expression. It's not avoiding offending. It is engaging, right, in a constructive, positive expression of your joy of having the opportunity. So says the Ramban, Essen correspond to the principle of Avas Hashem, and Lavin correspond to the principle of Yiras Hashem. And Ava is doche es hayira. Love is more powerful than fear. That's how the Ramban explains. He says that's why Aseh is doche. I'm going to read the line to you since it's such a good, terrific line by the Ramban. It's very famous. This is in, if you have it, I don't have it in the Marmakom, so I should have put it there, but it's Parak Chaf, which is Parshas Yisro, the Atzaras HaDibros, and it is Pasuk, I believe it's Pasuk Ches. I'm going to find out in 1 second. Let me just read you the line, and then I'll tell you what I want to explain with it. Yeah. Here. He says, the Emesu, says the Ramban, this is Parak Chaf, Pasuk Zayin in Shmos. The Emesu Gamken ki midas Zachar, he's talking about Zachar v'Shamar, right? Zachar is, B'dibar Echad Nemar. Ramzo b'mitzvahs aseh. That, reflects a positive commandment. V'hu ayotze mi midas ha'ahava. And that is something that issues from love of God. V'hu l'midas harachamim. Ki osa mitzvahs adonav, if a person does God's commandments, ahuvlo va'adonav mirachem alav, then he is beloved unto the Rabboni Shalom, and Hashem, his master, will have compassion over him. Umidas shamar, when you say don't do this, don't do that, don't do the next thing, that's b'mitzvah lo saseh, that don't do this, don't do that. V'hu l'midas hadin, right? V'yotza midas hayira, right? That's you're supposed to be have enough fear of God that you don't engage in behavior that might be tempting, like stealing and like all sorts of moral, impropriety. They might be pleasurable, or you're where there's an inclination or unexpected, physical, benefit, but you abstain out of a sense of fear. So somebody who, is careful not to do things that are offensive to his master, that reflects his fear of his master, his respect and his fear. V'lachein, says the Ramban, this is the brilliant line, mitzvah sa'aseh gedola the mitzvah lo saseh. A positive commandment is greater than a negative commandment. Kemosha ha'ava gedola mehayira, just as the love is greater than the fear. Ki hamakayim v'oseh begufo ubimamono ritzon adonav, a person who fulfills, whether it's physically or monetarily, the will of his master. Here the Rabbanu Shalom, who gadol me'anishmar me'asos hara b'einav. That's considered to be more significant than the one who just makes sure he doesn't. What's a greater testament to your bond to your master? Not offending him, not disobeying his rules, or also engaging, in the activities that he encourages. Obviously, the second is a greater expression of devotion. The first is more conservative with a small c, meaning it is more, just making sure that you don't violate. There's the key line. It says the Ramban, that's the reason why a positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. Gadol, this is very fascinating. V'osabo din kegon malka sumisa the einosim bo din b'mitzvah saseh klal ela b'mordin kimolula v'tzitzis eniosa sukkei eniosa shad Sanhedrin makinos or chi kabal olav lasos or chetetze nafsho. So the Ramban does something very remarkable. On the one hand, he builds this idea that love is greater than fear. We can understand that. A positive command, doing positive commands, is a greater expression of devotion, whereas, making sure that you don't rebel or violate, is a more minimalist expression. That's an expression of fear, as opposed to be an outpouring, a gushing of, affection and love. But then in the end of the piece, Ramban says something that seems to completely negate everything that he just said.
He does it.
What?
You beat the guy up until he does the mitzvah.
No, not only that. So no, that he says that if you say I refuse, and you make okay, so that leave that aside. But what he says that's more important is he points out that what my response to Dr. Weg before, which was, which gets a bigger punishment? Transgressing of a lo saseh, or fulfilling or abstaining from a mitzvah saseh? Which triggers a bigger punishment, aside from Korban Pesach and Milah? The answer is the lo saseh. But the Ramban himself is emphasizing that. Well, I'm going to read that line again. Umipnei zeh yeh ha'onesh b'mitzvahs lo saseh gadol v'osa b'din k'gam malchus umisa. Ve'enosin bo din b'mitzvahs saseh. That seems to be the opposite. Doesn't that show that if it's a more severe punishment, doesn't that show that it's of greater significance?
But I think we don't relate onshin, the severity of onshin to schar and everything.
No, that's a different point. Okay, right. I mean, but isn't that what the Ramban is saying here? But right, the Mishnah in Masechet Avos, says Eina to yodea, matan scharon, shel mitzvos, meaning we don't really know how to judge these things. Although if you look at the Rambam and that Mishnah in Avos, in his commentary, he says that's true about mitzvah within the world of mitzvah saseh. But he says where you have onshim in lo saseh, you can usually tell because the more severe the punishment. Although that isn't so simple either. Sometimes you can add punishment because of the ubiquity of a sin, because people don't otherwise take it seriously, because it may lead to other things. There may be other reasons also why there are more severe
concept
sins.
Is not inconsistent with the concept of Godol Mitzvah Vosa and
Let's leave that for a moment. We'll get back to it. But what is Ramban? I think Ramban is saying something else. And I think he's saying something a little bit complex, but something that is so true and so profound. And that is as follows. If I ask you, I'll go back to what I asked you before, which is of greater significance? I'm choosing my words carefully. Avas Hashem or Yiras Hashem? The answer is it's a tough question.
But the Chazal always say that Avos Hashem is the higher.
Well, this Rabban said that Avos doches hayira, but is it really true? Then why do you get a bigger onish for violating the yira? So the answer is it's a little bit this is how it goes. The answer is in some respects, Yiras Hashem is more core and more basic. And in other respects, let me say it this way. The core commitment that you have is defined by Yiras Hashem. Like if you have a relationship with someone, the first thing, before you start talking about how much affection, and how much devotion, and the inspiring, quality of your relationship, the first thing is you have to make sure that you are honest and that you are loyal. Without first being, having the basic, loyalty, right? You don't get to the second phase of, cultivating greater affection. And the same thing is true when it comes to the world of halacha and our relationship to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Namely, Yiras Shamayim is more basic than Avas Hashem. You can't have Avas Hashem unless you first have Yiras Shamayim. And for that reason, it's a more egregious violation when you trample on the Yira than when you abstain from the Ava. Abstain from the Ava, what's that?
It depends, Rabbi. How do you really translate or explain the word Yira? Yira could be fear of God. Yira could also be respecting God or whatever it is.
In this case, you're right. Right. You're totally right, but I don't think it matters in this case. Meaning, you're right that there are two types of yiras, and it matters in other things. So it's what we sometimes call yirat ha'onesh and yirat haromamus. Right? Yirat ha'onesh means you're worried that you're going to be punished, the pragmatic fear. Yirat haromamus is, awe or respect. So you're totally right, but it doesn't matter. In the end of the day, if I say to you, what's the relationship between, the facets of respect or fear on the one hand, and love and affection on the other? The answer is the more basic requirement, the more primal or primitive requirement is respect. If you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Of course.
Once you have respect and loyalty, right, then you can cultivate affection, right, and a more specialized, loving relationship. So what the Ramban is telling us is something very basic. When it comes to onshim, when it comes to punishments, actually violating, let me say it this way, Ava is a greater aspiration than Yira as long as it's built on Yira. But Yira is a more basic and indispensable component, because you can have Yira without Ava, but you can't have Ava without Yira, is what I'm trying to say. And therefore, when you violate the Yira, you get a more severe punishment because it's an act of rebellion and disrespect, and therefore it's more egregious. On the positive side, if you're even already, involved in expressions of Ava, and these are sincere and they are constructive and they have integrity, then you've gone well beyond Yira to the point of Ava. Yira is a minimum. Ava is icing on the cake, and reflects a more aspirational, relationship. So onshim are not, you get onshim not because the violation, not because the lav is more important than the aseh, but because it's more basic, and its violation is more offensive than the abstaining from an aseh, if you understand me. So how does this help you with aseh dochal aseh? So here we go back to something we were talking about last week, and that is, are we talking about hutra or are we talking about dechuya? We have these two perspectives when it comes to a clash. Let me say it this way. Normally in the Torah, right, you have, the ideal is you should fulfill all of the, different obligations of the Torah, right? Negative commandments and positive commandments. That's Taryag mitzvos. That's what you're supposed to do. The Chazal say that the Taryag mitzvos are keneged, Ramach Evarim and Shasa Gidin, parts of the body. It's almost like a homeostasis, meaning the idea is that, the mitzvos, when they work, in conjunction with one another, are like a perfect balance, So you're supposed to do all of them. But in the world, there are sometimes circumstances where you have to choose, not your fault, but you're thrust in a situation where you can't accomplish everything. And you have to make a hard choice. So when you have to make a hard choice, what are the rules? So on the one hand, you would think if you have an assay and a lav, that you should be careful about the lav, because that's a more core, basic, and indispensable, foundation, right? And onesh-wise, right, you're if you voluntarily violated, intentionally violated, you'd be punished much more severely for the lav, and therefore safeguarding the lav would seem to be your first priority. If you looked at it as a contest between the asay and the lav, that's how you would look at it. However, when a person has to make a difficult decision, so we sometimes call it triage, right? What you want to do is not just assess, you have two choices. Are you going to pick A over B? What you're really trying to do is maximize or look at A and B together. You want to maximize your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? Something has to go because we're in an imperfect situation and there needs to be a violation one way or another for whatever reason. It's out of our control. So instead of saying, you pick this or you pick that, what we're really trying to do is there's no rebellion in whatsoever, right? This is all within the prescribed halacha. This is what we're trying to figure out, what you're supposed to do as a triage person to maximize your avodas Hashem. That's where the Ramban says that Ava is doche esayira, because this is not a situation where you're rebelling. Is it better, to positively express your affection for the Ribono Shel Olam, even though that means rebelling against him? That's not the question here. If that were the case, then it would be better not to rebel.
But the question is, what's the criteria? Because, for example, one could say that Ava is a higher level of, you can rely on that more. If somebody is doing something from Ava, it's going to stay forever. If he's doing something from Yira, tomorrow maybe he's not so afraid anymore.
I can hear an argument the opposite, Anthony, that when you do it Ava, you fall out of love. Yira, when you're scared forever. I could totally flip that argument.
Except if it's Ava, Tluya B'Dava.
Rosensweig said you can't have Ava with Yira. Is that clear?
I said you can't have Ava without Yira.
Yeah, I'm saying, is that clear? Because you can't have Avas Hashem
without Yira Hashem. Meaning, what I'm saying is, if you're being
you can't just love Hashem. You love nature. You love Hashem does good things. Does miracles.
Well, wait a second.
But you don't.
Your love is, you're doing it because you're commanded, but that doesn't mean that you're not doing it from the Ava. Okay, rather than from the fact that you're afraid you're going to get a punishment. You're going to go to Gehenna.
It's a higher level. It's the next level, and of course, we would in the ask. There are two different issues. In terms of being a core violation, a lav is much worse than violating a lav is worse than abstaining from an assay.
It's very simple.
In terms of being a more acute expression of the heights of the relationship, the ava, is a greater expression than the lav. So the point is as follows. If you were acting out of mered, out of rebellion, then we would say that's much, better you should curb your rebellions, even if that means doing less, mitzvos aseh. However, if this isn't rebellion, this is all out of ava, meaning you find yourself in a situation where it's pikuach nefesh, let's say. There's a mitzvah say of a chai bahem, and therefore you have to violate. You don't want to violate, but you're trying to weigh two obligations in the Torah. That's called triage. You're trying to get the maximum from the system without doing any rebellion. So that's when avas docha esayira. That's what the Ramban means to say. But that's only true if you apply what we call a hutra type of approach, meaning if it was a clash and you were just trying to pick, the most valuable or to violate the least offensive, then you would never say aseh docha lo saseh. You'd say that the lo saseh takes priority. However, if what you're trying to do is maximize your commitment to avodas Hashem, and you're trying to figure out what's the best way, if I can't do everything, what is the best way to express my avas Hashem, right, to do the most? So then the violation, isn't really a violation. It's something that comes about incidentally as a result of my maximizing the choice for Ava.
And why does it change when there's chorus?
When there's what?
When there's chorus, the lav sheish b'chorus. Why does it change?
Lav sheish b'chorus? No. The only thing that changes then is that.
In other words, an essay, we've now said
essay,
why an assay docha the los assay, because of all the reasons you just said right now.
Right.
So if that's the case, why would it change when the los assay has a chorus?
No, I see what you're asking. I mean, the Gemara. Now you're asking, going back to our Gemara.
Well, you've built up this argument to the point that we all understand why the commitment, so to speak, to the Rabbanu Shalom of doing the assay overpowers the los assay. Right. Okay, if that's the case, then just because the los assay is more severe, has chorus, why should that change the dynamic?
So I think the answer is, for the reasons that I explained before, two things. And that is that it could very well be that the kares just puts it over the top, meaning when there's a lav sheish ba kares,
that becomes merid.
In addition to the merid, there's also a more like objective, there's a more objective, detrimental consequence, that takes place, and therefore that is not something that you have the luxury, let's say, of triaging. It's always just like inherently, even when you take the merit element out of it, but that's a great question. But that's what I think the answer is. Whenever there's a capital offense on a lav level, that implies even kares, and certainly misas bezdin, that implies an effect, not just a violation, of an act. Right. But that's, I think, what you'd have to say. Okay. So that's, but the Ramban has this view of aseh docha lo saseh being a kind of a triage and a kind of a hutra. But most Rishonim are of the opinion that aseh docha lo saseh is, is more of a dechuya, where, one, causes the other to be violated. So last week, I want to get back.
The obvious problem with that of Ramban's argument is that aseh could also be bishvil, because of yirat shamayim or ahavat shamayim. Aseh could be either. You can shomer et Shabbat because you're afraid of the punishment either in this world or next world of violating Shabbat, or you could shomer Shabbat because you love Hashem and you love the concept of Shabbat.
So right. So the answer is that's, according to the Ramban, that's the difference between Zachor and Shamor. And that's the difference between there is both an aseh and a lav of Shabbos. The lav of Shabbos is to refrain from malacha. The aseh of Shabbos is to do actions on Shabbos, like Kiddush, like Oneg Shabbos, like Mikra Kodesh, like going to shul, like hearing, the rabbi's speech, laning,
well,
davening.
Rabbi, you made me think of something. 'Cause I once know with the conservative guys. So if you make Kiddush on Shabbos, but you don't keep Shabbos, you're Mekayim the Aseh of Kiddush. How does that work? Meaning, inherently, you're not keeping it, right?
So this is the thing I've talked about in the past, but it's the Gemara says in Masachet. I don't want to get too far afield, but the Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Samech Tes Omer Aleph says that the reason that we count in the Mishnah the 39 Avos Malacha, the Gemara says, like, what do you need to count them? What do you need to tell me that 39? Just it says, these are the Malach, Elaine, Malach. Zoreach, Choresh, Kotzer, ba 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 ba. So then the Gemara says 39 Avos Malach, or 40 minus 1 Malacha, they say. Arbaim Chasarach. So the Gemara says, why do you need to why do you need to mention the number? We can all count. So the Gemara says, Sheim Ason Kulan Behalamachas. If you didn't know any of the malachos, and you did every single malacha, in the same state of shkaga, you would bring 39 korbanos. That's what the Gemara says. I'll explain why I'm telling you this to answer your question. Yes. Just stay with me for a second. So then the Gemara says a very profound thing. The Gemara says, well, in order to bring a korban, 39 korbanos, right, you have to know that that's called shigas malacha, meaning you were shogeg about all the different malachos, all 39. But in order to do that, you have to be, Zadon Shabbos and shigas malacha. You have to at least know that it's Shabbos, right? Because if you didn't know it was Shabbos at all, let's say you thought it was Sunday, or you didn't know what Shabbos was, you had no clue that there is such an institution. You wouldn't bring 39 korbanos for every violation. You'd bring one because you don't even know what Shabbos is. So, meaning this is what I always say means a very fascinating topic, meaning sometimes you need a little knowledge in order
to be over. The better the Amaritz are, the better you are.
Otherwise, it kind of, I wouldn't say that, but otherwise it all collapses into a single, ignorance or single.
Right.
So the Gemara says, I don't understand. You don't know 39, you don't know any of the malachos. So the Yodale l'Shabbos b'mai, what do you know? That you have to know something. Otherwise, you would violate the 39. It'll all be one. Right?
Right.
So the Gemara gives an answer. The Gemara says, the Yodale b'tchumin aliba de Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that violating Tchum Shabbos wasn't an Av Malacha, and you don't bring a korban for that, but it is a Din Doraisa. You can't walk, the Tchum on Shabbos. If you do that, it's a Lav. It's not, that's why am I telling you this? So the Rishonim got very creative. It piqued their curiosity. They said, oh, we can figure out other things that he would know that would be some knowledge of Shabbos such that he could violate the other 39. So the Ritva, right, came up with your idea. The Ritva says, what if he knows about Kiddush and Havdalah? He knows that you're supposed to make Kiddush on Shabbos and Havdalah on Shabbos, but he doesn't know anything about the malachos. He doesn't know a single malacha.
Yeah, but I was asking it different, but I hear what Rabbi's saying. Okay.
That's not what you're asking?
No. What I'm asking is,
person doing it
are you Mekayim Kiddush? Are you Mekayim Kiddush when you're not keeping the rest? That's what I'm asking.
Right. So what I'm trying to explain to you, I'm just trying to I'll answer that more specifically in a moment, but this is an interesting Ritva. The Ritva basically says, if you think you know something by knowing Kiddush and you know nothing else about Shabbos or not about any of the violations, then you don't know Kiddush either.
Ah, that's where I'm going.
And therefore, to answer your question, to be a little more fair, to be a little more fair. So that's what I answered, what I understood you to be asking. But now, of course, there is still a bit of difference between what you're asking me and what I'm answering you, even though they are totally related. I mean, what I'm trying to show you is that sometimes you can have knowledge and information, but without a context, it becomes meaningless. So let's say you know about Kiddush, but you don't know anything else, any other Isur Malacha or anything else about Shabbos. Basically, that's not called Zodon Shabbos, according to the Ritva. Now, you're asking, in your particular case, there might be a different point, and that is you have people, they're not observant. They didn't grow up in an observant home, but they know there's something called Shabbos. They know there's something called Isur Malacha. They're not committed and they're not particularly knowledgeable, but they know about Kiddush. Probably they know that Kiddush, is connected to Shabbos as a day of rest, and they probably know something.
Even more so, they may be making.
If you're asking me, would we encourage somebody who's doing nothing to still make Kiddush? Especially in our woeful, ignorant Jewish society.
Well, your whole mitzvah,
The answer is we would. If you ask me, does he fulfill the full mitzvah if that's all he's doing? And it's completely bereft of any, or it's completely disconnected to everything. The answer is it's very compromised. But I'd rather be positive and say there still some benefit. Sure.
Example
but I'm sorry, but Rabbi gave an example of a guy. In Rabbi's example, I'm talking about someone that knows Shabbos, and they've decided they're going to make Kiddush and they're going to go to the show, or they're going to do whatever they do.
Well, if it's a question of making Kiddush and going to the show, or not making Kiddush and not going to the show,
it's better to make Kiddush.
It's better not to make Kiddush if that's the justification for going to the show. But
the problem with Kiddush is that what he's saying is insincere.
Well, what I'm saying now is that
in other words, another mitzvah and another malacha would have been better. If he made an Oneg Shabbos and then he went and then to his show, that's one thing. But when you say Kiddush and you are lying basically.
What I would say is, listen, what I'm trying, the bigger point I'm trying to make is that things that you do that are inconsistent and without context are compromised. That's what I'm saying. However, to be clear about it, as I say, we live in a very complicated Jewish world, and a lot of people don't have the benefit of background or
I'm talking about people who have background.
So I would rather people do things. If doing something is going to make you justify, violating larger things, I'd rather they not do it. But in most cases, that's not what it is. In most cases, the more people do, the more they'll end up doing, and hopefully it will trigger,
not necessarily.
It looks like Rabbi Roth wants to say something, and he's a voice of experience.
Yes, I really do. To begin with, there are two kinds of yira, clearly.
Yeah.
And they're both included in the paragraph of Kiddush HaChodesh.
By Yira Shamayim and Yira Skate.
Yira Shamayim and I don't have the text in front
Yira
of
Skate.
it. What?
Yira Shamayim and Yira Skate.
Yira Skate, yeah, exactly. Yira Shamayim, that's reverence. It seems to me that there are three levels. One is Yiras HaChet. The second one is, I would say, the concern would be the Avera, the transgression. And the highest level of relationship to the Almighty is Yiras, as you put it before, his Romamus.
Yiras HaRomamus, right. Right, no, 100%. That's a great point, that otherwise it seems like a repetitive clause, but it reflects that there are two types. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. 100%. But anyways, I don't want to get into the technical questions that we discussed before about what's better for people who are inconsistent to be doing. I'm trying to give you general parameters. I hope everybody understands. But the bigger idea is the idea that is connected to what we're talking about. And that is there's a difference between choosing, selecting what you're going to do and what not to do. That's one kind of halachic decision making, which we would evaluate in one way. And there, the yira certainly outweighs the ava. I mean, I'd rather somebody, make sure that he doesn't transgress, even if that means, that, he'll do some less mitzvos, because that's a more core and basic. Again, the Yira part comes before the Ava part. But what I'm trying to explain is that when it's not out of rebellion or choice, but it's a circumstance that is thrust upon you, where you have to make difficult decisions, and it's kind of like a triage. It's like almost like a medical triage. It's you're trying to figure out what's best for the whole body.
Rabbi, I'm looking at the psukim.
Yeah.
And thinking about the psukim. So we have "Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol me'odecha." That's quite a strict mitzvah that we have to do, because you have three descriptions as to how to love Hashem. And when it comes to the mitzvahs lo taseh, it's "V'yaresa me'elokecha ani Hashem." Both are very strict, very strong, to the point that it's very difficult, at least for my thinking, my little thinking, to decide which is worse. Is aseh lo taseh, doche lo aseh, in terms of avas Hashem and so on and so forth. So I'm getting a problem here.
Yeah. Well, let's add one other thing, and we'll see if Rabbi Roth agrees. But in the relationship between Avat Hashem and Yiras Hashem in the Rambam is particularly fascinating. In the second chapter of Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, the first chapter of Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah is just that. It's about belief in Hashem, and it's about Yichud Hashem, the unity of God, indivisibility, and so on and so forth. The second chapter begins with the mitzvah of la'ahavaso u'liyiraso, to love and to fear. So, but the way that the Rambam described, it's very fascinating to note. Rambam was a great organizer. He, as we know, the Yad Chazaka is a magnificent, structure. And the Rambam's very organized and very systematic. So when he mentions a mitzvah, he describes it. And then he goes on to the next one and describes it, and the next one and describes it, and so on and so forth. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to get the Rambam. Okay, so, but when it comes to Avas Hashem and Yiras, I've got a little bit far afield, but this is an important topic, so I'm okay with that. When it comes to Avat and Yiras Hashem, the Rambam deals with them together in one fell swoop. It's a very interesting phenomenon. This is what he says. This is Perek Beis, Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, Halacha Aleph and Beis. Listen to this. Hakel hanichbad v'hanora, right? The honored and awesome, I guess you'd say, God, right? Mitzvah le'ahavo, you're obligated to love him. U'liyira mimenu, interesting, to love him and to fear from him. Yeah. Shenemar v'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, v'nemar es Hashem Elokecha tira. So instead of dealing with these mitzvos separately, for example, in Sefer Mitzvos, mitzvah number 3 and mitzvah number 4. Mitzvah number 3 is Avos Hashem. Mitzvah number 4 is Yiras Hashem. But in Yad Chazaka, in one halacha, he deals with both, right? Mitzvah la'avo liyira, and he quotes both psukim. And then in halacha beis, you understand why he does this. He says, "V'heich hu haderech la'avasa v'yiraso." Okay, normally what he would do is he'd say the mitzvah, and then he'd tell you how to do it. Then he'd say the next mitzvah and tell you how to do it. Here he has both mitzvahs formulated as a unit.
But they're inseparable.
And then he says, and how do you do both of them? And how do you do both of them? So the Rambam explains you go back and forth between each one enhances the other. Listen to this beautiful language.
Was he saying
at a time when man contemplates God's creations, God's astonishing creations and his actions, the yira mehem chachmaso she'en la erech v'lo kates. That will trigger a sense of awe because his intellectual faculty will realize, that this is, unparalleled. Miyad, the yira triggers miyad hu ohev. He breaks into a sense of avas Hashem, umishabeach umifaer umitavet tava gdola, and he becomes very passionate, impassioned. He starts, praising Hashem. Leda Hashem Hagala becomes obsessed with the divine knowledge. Kemosha Amar David HaMelech, right? Sama nafshi lelokim. Lekel I'm intoxicated, or
Friday night,
starved. Exactly. And when he starts thinking about all this a little bit more, miyadhu nirta, immediately he is
holds back.
Lachorab, v'yarevi yifached, and he starts, this meaning fear triggers love, love triggers fear.
So is he saying that they're inseparable?
They're inseparable because they're two indispensable.
Two sides of the same coin?
Yeah. V'yadea shehu birya ktana shvela afela omed b'da dea kala meuta lifnei tmim deos k'mosha amar David HaMelech ki arech shamecha ma enosh kisis garena ulefi advarim ha'ela ani mevaer kalim gdolim b'maaseh ribono olamim k'dei shepetach lemevin le'ahov es Hashem k'mosha amar chachamim b'inyan ha'ava mitoch kacha tamakir es misha amar v'ayah ha'olam. So what the Rambam did here in an organizational way is perfect, meaning he refused to separate Ava and Yira. So he formulates them as a mitzvah in one halacha, and then he describes them in one halacha, and in that halacha, not only does he describe them together, but he explains how each one deepens the other. Each one triggers another level of the other.
But actually, he's saying also that it's impossible to have one without the other, which means that that's a little contradictory to his idea of treating them as two separate.
Well, because they are separate, but they're really.
In other words, what he's saying, there's no human being who could say, I have Avos Hashem, I have no Yiras Hashem, or I have Yiras Hashem, I don't have Avos Hashem. It's an impossibility.
So again, now in light of that, the Ramban's idea that Esin represent Ava and Lavin represent Yira, but Ava is Doches Hayira on the one hand, but on the other hand, the violation for Yira is more severe than the violation of Ava. All that is totally understandable because the core, and the as a foundational part is the Yira. Just that, if you can move past the Yira, as Rabbi Roth correctly said, as we said before, even Yira has two elements, right? There's actual fear of consequences.
Yeah, I meant it in different
there's Yiras Haromamus, right? There's, like Chazan mentioned also, it's the sense of awe, the inability even to find the right kind of articulation. So this whole topic that we've been doing, which is and now we go back. We're going to have to stop in a minute, but when we continue next week, go back to the actual mitzvah of Yibum Mitzvah. I'll take the question first, and then I want to tell you what we're going to do next week. Yeah.
Well, it's just a very brief comment. As a physician, we often encounter in patients that same phenomenon, that when you're in extreme danger and that you're out of danger, but you have a chronic disease, very often you'll notice that patients become a lot more, not just emotional, but also connected to Hashem. So it's difficult to kind of parse the two, and I can certainly relate from an experiential standpoint the need to have love and fear at the same time, because they feed on each other.
Yeah, very true. And if you look, by the way, if you look throughout Tanakh, there's always this connection. Gilu bira'ada. Gil is joy. But you joy, and also in trembling and in fear. And I always the joy of Sukkot and the fear of Yom Kippur, is another great example of the conjoining, of these of these two ideas. Again, in as you say, experientially, it's just so true. People intellectually, you might think that you can isolate, or that you can abstract one of these from the other. But when it comes to a deeper, sense of respect and awe, and a deeper sense of, love and affection, they're always, intermingled, even though they are still different for sure. But and so that's why in this topic that we're doing, it's just so interesting, because on an Onesh level, the Yira part, clearly, is dominant in terms of punishment, and yet, that's why I call it triage. I'm using the medical, concept as well. You want to do, it's like, oh, he has a problem with his heart, he has a problem with his, with his
liver.
He has a problem with, his kidneys. So it's not, you're not making a choice by saying, oh, what's more important, the heart, the liver, or the kidneys, right? You're looking at the total patient, and you're saying, given the reality of this particular patient, we want to maximize his health, and that's going to require,
speaking as
even
one
if
that is
the heart is more important, maybe the maximizing of the health requires a different therapy, because that's the bigger question, is not to sacrifice one limb for another. I mean, sometimes if that's what it is, that's what it is. But the bigger idea is to
make everything work.
To make everything work, or at least
speaking as
what were you
someone
saying
who's
about
done a
next
number
week?
of triages in his professional life, can I ask you to dwell a moment on punishments in categorizing them from the most severe to the least of all the punishments?
What does this have to do with it?
Well, there are levels of capital crimes in the halacha,
like skila, sreifa,
chenek. So those have a certain hierarchy. Like sreifa is the worst, and there's skila, chenek, and so on.
Lashes. Would it be?
Then comes after that, we have you have divine capital crime, we'll call it. And even if it's misas bezdin, but there's something called kares, and there's something called misa b'dei shamayim. Those are different levels, but they're both cases of you're deserving of a capital crime, but that's obviously a lesser punishment than a physical capital crime carried out by the courts. Then after that, you have Malchus. The Gemara has a whole discussion in Masachet Sanhedrin. The Gemara says whether Malchus b'makom misa omedes, meaning it's corporal punishment. So obviously it's not irrevocable it's irrevocable in terms of the lashes, but it doesn't end your life. But because it's a physical manifestation of punishment, it shares a lot with capital punishments. So it's called, that's the Gemara has a discussion whether Malchus b'makom misa omedes. In order to trigger a court implemented capital crime or Malchus, there needs typically to be hasra. I mean, you have to be warned, and you have to acknowledge that your awareness of the impending punishment, should you insist on violating. So we don't like impose punishments cavalierly. You can think of it this way: the divine capital punishments, that's up to the Rabboni Shalom. We don't have to. He's a Yodea Kloyos Valev, and we can leave that up to him. He's wise.
Is divine punishment more severe than temporal punishment?
It's more no, not of the capital type, but it is more severe than Malchus.
Rabbi, what did you say you were going to discuss next week?
What's that?
You said you're going to end off and tell us what we're discussing next week.
Okay. Yeah. So let's stop here. And then next week, I would like to pick up on whether Yibum, classic Yibum, is Hutra or Dechuya, meaning is every Yibum case is a case where you are performing the mitzvah of Yibum, mitzvah.
Got it.
And you're doing that at the expense of the Isser of Eisha Sach.
That's a very good class.
This is one of the rayas. So what we started discussing last time, and I've been elaborating on the bigger ideas since then, is that there's a debate between the Balei Tosas. I want to examine that next week. Balei Tosas think that every Yibum is a Dechuya, meaning we look at it always as a clash of contest, and you're overriding one, need overrides the other. The Ramban and the Ramah, don't look at it that way. And the Rambam, they look at it that in circumstances where there's a mitzvah sibum, there is no Isser of Eshasach. So it's not that one overrides the other. A little bit about like what I was saying about the Ramban and Ased Ochalos Asay tonight. It's more that, there's an inner limit, to certain prohibitions. And when you encounter, when the option is to do a mitzvah saseh, or this, and again, in Yibum and Eshasach, it's an institutional clash in the sense that every Yibum is Eshasach. Right. So that's what I want to examine next week. And I want to see some of the Gemaras that imply in some of the commentaries in different places. For example, what is the law when you do chalitza? Let's say the Ava Yibum case, and you did chalitza, correct? So after the chalitza, you decide you change your mind. You want to marry the woman. Is that a violation of Eshasach? Or is Eshasach gone away? Things like that. Okay. So those are very consequential. That's a Gemara Daf Yudam and Beis. But first, we're going to examine the Balei Tosas and the Ramban and the Rambam, and then we will apply it, to other cases. Okay.
Larry's mother Sheva, they sponsored the shir Chaya Bat Tzvi. You mentioned that. It's Neshama Sheva and Aliyah.
What's the name?
Alex, it's Chaya Bat Tzvi.
Chaya Bas Tzvi. So the shir is dedicated in the memory of Chaya Bas Tzvi.
Chaya Bat Tzvi.
The Divrei Torah, the Neshama Sheva and Aliyah. And everybody should have a great week, and we look forward to continuing next week.